Good morning. It is 11 o'clock a.m. and I call to order the January 24th, 2023 Board of Trustees Workshop and Business Meeting. Do I hear a motion to enter executive session to discuss employment recommendations for the 2022-2023 school year?
Madam Chair, I move that the board enter executive session to discuss 2022-2023 employment recommendations.
Thank you, Mrs. Henson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none. Y'all have to shout from over there. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. We will now enter into executive session.
just got up. I'm good now.
All right. We are back. Do I hear a motion to conclude executive session and return to general session?
Madam Chair, I move that we exit executive session and return to
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. I'm kind of channeling my inner Barry Manilow here with the microphone. I call to order the general session of the January 24th Board Workshop. The district is in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act by notifying the media of the date, time, and place of the meeting. The district tapes the meeting for accuracy in preparing the minutes. At this time, I yield the floor to Mr. Chris Rice.
Madam Chair, fellow board members, staff, and guests, please rise as we say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Mrs. Henson. Do I have a second?
second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Do I hear a motion that the board approve 8 certified recommendations for the 2022-2023 academic year?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve 8 certified recommendations for the 2022-2023 academic year.
Thank you, Mrs. Henson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Is there any discussion? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Do I hear a motion that the board approve 2 administrative recommendations for the 2022-2023 academic year?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve 2 administrative recommendations for the 2022-2023 academic year.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. McCown. Is there any discussion? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Do I hear a motion for the board to accept the newly hired support staff report for the 2022-2023 academic year as presented by administration?
Madam Chair, I move the board accept the newly hired support staff reports for 2022-2023 as presented by administration.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Is there any discussion? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. All right, and at this time, I'm going to put down my microphone and turn the meeting over to Dr. Postlewaite to introduce the budget planning session. As a reminder, this is an actual working session for the board. During the session, there will be intervals when board members will be conversing in small groups with district staff.
Thank you. And to get right to the point, we wanted to open today's meeting by sharing with you what goes on behind the scenes. And so first up, we have Jessica Buzzhart, who, among other things, takes care of our preschool programs. And she's going to show you how she worked with multiple sources of funds to generate more funds to support early childhood education, remove costs from the general fund, which is the fund the board is responsible for working with. And while she lowers the cost of expenditures in the general fund, she actually increases the opportunities for students by 5 additional classrooms, which will bring an additional 160 preschool students in for services next year. So we simply wanted her to show you, if I could direct your attention to the front of the room with the colored sticky notes. Each of those sticky notes represents a teacher, and Jessica is going to explain to you how she works. And there are any number of people in the district doing this sort of work right now, but we're just sharing this as one example of how the staff is combing through all of our different funding sources to try to create capacity in the general fund. Thank you. Jessica?
Is it on? Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Dr. Postlewaite. She set that up beautifully for me to explain how we figured out how to increase our preschool opportunities in Lexington One. So currently we have over 500 students sitting on our waiting list. And I'll just let that number sit with you for a minute. Those are, those represent actual children who would love to be enrolled in our preschool programs. And I think at one point at a board meeting, one of you said, it's just like you won the lottery when you get a spot in one of the Lexington One preschool programs. And we feel the same way, and our teachers work really hard to provide that opportunity for our students. And so it was very important for us to increase our offerings, but there's this thing called a budget, right? And so we worked really hard to do that without increasing costs to the general fund. In fact, the general fund gets actually gets a little bit back, so it's quite awesome. So we're going to show you that here represented on the chart paper and the sticky notes. So I am a teacher, by trade, and so this is how I taught in my classroom, and so this is how best I thought I could share with SLT, and now you all. So thank you for being here. All right. I do want to add one additional piece of information. You'll see this represented in our plan. It was really important to us to increase our offerings in Gilbert and Pillion. We know that the offerings that are offered in the community, those two communities, are less than in, our current Lexington area, and so you'll see that represented in our plan. And you also have a handout, and so on the handout, this is an overview of our current programs that are represented in black, and then our proposed offerings and changes represented in blue, and so you'll see that. And then you'll also see some schools marked as CERDEP, and so CERDEP is a fund that is given to us by the state, so it's state revenue that allows us to serve school students in certain schools, and so it depends on the poverty threshold of that school as to whether or not they receive a CERDEP designation. But really, those funds have allowed us to do this today. So I'm going to share that with you now. And so currently, this is really a state of the state for our current school year. So we have 3 tuition-based programs, and you'll see that represented on your handout. Pleasant Hill, Midway, and Lake Murray are where those programs are currently housed. And previously, it was presented to you all that we shift those programs to what we really know is needs-based, and so students that actually qualify based on risk factors. And so this was one way. We already had this FTE here, so we have 3 teacher FTE and 3 IA FTE, but this is meant to be a self-sustaining program. So we had to find a way to move these to general fund because obviously if it's not tuition-based, the families aren't paying for those programs anymore. And so these kids aren't going away. They'll finish out this year, but moving forward, we propose that these programs become needs-based. And so these have to become general fund, and I'll show you that in a second. And so again, this year we have 2.38 CERDEP teacher FTEs, and we have 7.2 CERDEP instructional assistant FTEs. And again, that's currently, like as of today. In general fund, we have 19.62 general fund teacher FTEs and 16.83125 general fund IA FTEs. And then these are our new proposed CERDEP classes. So we would like to add 5 classes, which Dr. Postlewaite mentioned, at 4 different sites. 1 additional class at Red Bank, 1 at White Knoll, 2 at Forts Pond, and 1 at Gilbert Elementary. So you see Gilbert and Pillion represented in those additional classes. And these are the IAFT for that. And then we also have inclusion classes currently. So we have this one preschool IDEA. So those are federal funds that we receive for our special needs programs. And that's just hanging out over here by itself. This is pretty much a 0.5 instructional assistant FTE. And so these funds are used to, run those programs as well. So this is currently the only one that's represented in our inclusion programs. Okay? And so let me show you how I'm going to move the sticky notes and show you how we created a budget neutral. Actually, we gave a little bit back to the general fund to do this. All right, so we need to move these tuition-based to general fund, but we don't want to add any to general fund. So we have to move some away first. And then we also need to figure out where these 5 new ones are going to go, right? So thinking about how can we do that to create a budget neutral plan, okay? All right, and so these teachers are currently CERDEP. It's kind of hard to do this and hold the microphone, so forgive me. We have, let me grab these off first. Well, actually, I'm going to do something different. Hold on. All right, so the schools I just pulled off are Red Bank, White Knoll, and Gilbert. And you'll see on your handout that those are CERDEP schools, okay? And so currently, those are CERDEP teachers funded out of general fund. But with our increase in revenue, because we increase our CERDEP offerings, we're able to move those to CERDEP fund and free up 3 FTEs for general fund, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 3 tuition-based. These are not at CERDEP schools. This is Lake Murray, Midway, and Pleasant Hill, so they can't be CERDEP. But we just created some here, right? We created 3 spots here, so we're going to just trade those out. So now we are able to pick up the 3 tuition-based classes in general fund by moving 3 general fund to CERDEP, so it's budget neutral. Like we didn't add anything, okay? All right, and then we have 3 CERDEP IAs that are currently in general fund, but again, with our increase in revenue, we can move those over. So we're going to move those. Oh, yep, right here. So that creates 3 open FTE in general fund. So now we can, for IAs, so now we can take the 3 tuition-based IAs and move those to general fund, because again, remember, these aren't CERDEP schools, so that's why we had to move the CERDEP ones first. All right? So now we've picked up, see, this is empty, because this went away. Let's fast forward to 23, 24. And now we're funding those 3 classes with general fund. So that's 60 students off of that over 500 plus waiting list that we're able to serve that meet the criteria to be in our needs-based programs. Huge win, right? And we haven't hit the general fund, just remind you. All right, so now we need to figure out what about all these CERDEP classes we want to add? Well, again, we're increasing our revenue because we receive a per student allocation for CERDEP. And so with the increase, we're able to actually take all 5 of these and move them to CERDEP. So all 5 new classes will be funded out of CERDEP, okay? And the same for the IAs. So we're going to move those over. So this, well, I got to do one more thing before I say that. All right, so now we're still budget neutral. We haven't hit the general fund. We've funded our CERDEP classes because we've increased our offerings, increased our revenue. So now all these are funded by CERDEP. Now we still have, like, this person right here is 0.94. So we're going to move that, right? We like even FTEs, right, Jennifer? Yes, Lindsay, yes. Yeah. Okay, so we have right here this teacher. Where'd she go? So we're going to move 0.06 of a general fund FTE to CERDEP. So the general fund is getting back 0.06 because now we're making this teacher just 1.0 CERDEP. We have the flexibility to do that. The funds are there, so we can do that. All right, and then we have another teacher. She's 0.5 CERDEP. So we're going to pull her 0.5, and now she's 1.0 CERDEP. So again, the general fund gets back 0.5 teacher FTE. And then we have, let's see our other one here. Another teacher is .94 FTE, so we're moving her .06 general fund to CERDEP. So now she's 1.0. So this represents a total of 11 teacher FTE in CERDEP. Now we're going to actually have 18 CERDEP classes, and so CERDEP doesn't give you enough funds to run the program and provide the teacher FTE and the IEFT, so we can't fund all 18, but we can fund 11. But then all the supplies for those 18 classes come out of the CERDEP fund, okay? Now we still have a little bit more to give back to the general fund, so we have right here. This is, let me find her. This is another one that is .2. Here she is. All right, so we're moving .8 general fund IA back to CERDEP to make her 1.0, and so now that's again a .8 general fund FTE that the general fund gets back, okay? All right, so to summarize, now we have 11 here and 11 here, and then we've reduced our general fund FTEs, both teacher and IA, by a little bit. We've picked up 5 new CERDEP classes in those schools I mentioned earlier. This just remains over here, and this is a summary of those changes. So this current year, we have 13 CERDEP classes. We have 8 non-CERDEP. So these are needs-based, but they're not funded by CERDEP and can't be. Those aren't in CERDEP schools. We have 3 tuition-based, and we have 500 on our waiting list. So in next school year with this proposal, we'll have 18 CERDEP classes, 11 non-CERDEP. You notice tuition-based went away. Remember, those became non-CERDEP needs-based classes. And then we are able to remove 160 from our waiting list that we currently have 500 kids sitting on. So a huge win for our preschool children and those families. And so 420 students served in 2022-2023 in our needs-based programs. This increases it to 580 students served in those needs-based programs. Okay? So that's how I figured out how to make a budget neutral plan. I know there's fancy spreadsheets, and as I'm doing this, Jennifer is throwing everything in a spreadsheet, and that's why we have good friends in finance. Yes, you have a question?
So at the end of the day, when everything's moved around, there will be 5 additional preschool classrooms. But does that really mean 10 classes? Are they the AM, PM, or are these all-day preschool?
These are all day. I should have said that earlier. Thank you for asking. So all of these classes are full-day programs.
Full-day programs, so it's 5. So 160 additional students, 5 classes, that's 32 students a class.
There's 20 students in a class. So the 60 kids that aren't, you're saying, but it's 100. So those 60 kids that are currently sitting on our needs-based waiting list, by changing the tuition-based programs, those are programs that already exist, but we're changing that program to a needs-based.
Okay, so 100 additional students will be
Yes.
in our district.
Yes.
Right, okay, I'm understanding the
Yes.
numbers.
It's, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
And how many FTEs does the general fund get back to?
I knew you were going to ask me the exact number.
Is it 1 or is it 1,000? I know it's not
No, it's
ballpark. The
point,
bottom line is we're at-
.06 teacher FTE plus .5 plus .06. All those are teacher FTEs.
So 0.7.
And then .8
Yeah,
IA FTE.
good job. We appreciate that. Our
Yeah.
taxpayers appreciate that.
That's right, that's right. So, well, CERDEP allows us to do that. And so, you know, this is our second year of being a CERDEP, being able to receive CERDEP funds. Previously, districts were, your poverty percentage had to be a certain threshold to be district-wide CERDEP. But they relaxed that and said schools could be CERDEP eligible, which is awesome for our students. And that's represented here.
Well, the state has changed our funding model, so where we can access state funds moving forward, I think it's fair game. So thank you.
Absolutely.
So I have one question. Obviously, it's great, we can take 160 students off that 500 student waiting list, but with our growth in the district, do we have any projections? Will that waiting list go right back to 500, or do
It
do we have
could.
a crystal ball that tells us that, or
It
any
could. So-
measures that tell us that?
We do have plans to continue to grow the program. So they're, past the 23-24 school year, there's a 24-25 plan, et cetera, et cetera. Absolutely. And we hope our waiting list does grow. It's kind of a catch-22, but we want as many kids there so we could move them over if we have space available, because kids move on and off every day. Yes.
And what may help that discussion is they know what a mill is worth. And so obviously to backfill the number of kids, that's the number of FTEs. So that's salary, benefits, and expense. So maybe as we frame these discussions of, there's 300 kids that still have the need, we may need to frame it as, in order to meet that need, we need to raise millage by this amount so that you understand as a board member what that means to our community. So that may help us in our conversations. So.
Thank you.
Jessica, one quick, so with the math here, and kind of piggyback on what Mr. Rice was just saying, we still have 340 students that we're not going to serve, is that correct?
If the waiting list were to remain the same, absolutely. There still will be kids on the waiting list. And there still could be kids on the waiting list that might not meet any of our criteria, but in our non-CERDEP schools, if there's space available, we will move those kids over regardless. And so, to your point, kind of taking it in another tangent, is that we want all families to apply regardless of whether they think meet the criteria or not, because if there's space, we're going to fill it. That's right. So, that's right. So on January 30th, our 4K application opens up, and hence our new waiting list will start for the 23-24 school year. Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Good news, they all come off the waiting list.
Yeah, they're all going to be served in kindergarten.
Wouldn't it be great if we did half the waiting list?
It's called universal pre-K, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we're a fan. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate that. It's been a pleasure working with colleagues that understand the finance side of it and the importance of trying to juggle all that. We titled it A Day in the Life of Funding Decision because we're dealing with all these funds. All we're dealing with at the board level today is just talking about the general fund. She talked about several different funding sources. We're only dealing with the general fund when we work on our annual budget. I'm going to back this up just a little bit in the presentation here. Again, the budget is just an annual plan. Things happen. Things are going to change. This is our plan. This is what ideal situation, this is what we would budget. You're going to have variations. Things are going to change, and you have to be prepared for that. And it's not just you do a budget, you put it on the shelf, and it's there, and it stays that way all year. It is a continual process. We look at it every month. We have to do budget transfers because you can't fill a position, so you have to outsource it to a purchase service. So it's a continual process. It's not just a one and done. And then the framework really needs to be around what our priorities are. What is Lexington One proud of, and what are our core foundation things that we want to keep? And it's going to align with all that. That's what your budget is supposed to do. Just to know, I'm going to go over the timeline, but we are required to have a public hearing when it comes to the budget. And then, of course, at the end, usually in June, that's when the board will approve the budget. So looking at the timeline here, we have accomplished what we set up to do in December. And we are working on January now. You can see the first two items have been done. We did meet with our Budget Advisory Council last week. Projected enrollment has been calculated. Again, that is a moving target. We used 45-day numbers, and they will change again at the 135th day, so we will keep updating those numbers. We're going to find out new information, and we have to modify those. You can see that SLT is collaborating with our principals and our division leaders. That's what it's about. It's not finance setting a budget. It's not the board setting a budget. It is a team effort and working and making sure we're putting kids first and doing what we need to do. And then tonight, we're here tonight. See, I'm so used to the evening meetings. this morning, we are here gathering recommendation from the board. And we're going to have some breakout sessions where we can talk about some of the things we're going to go over tonight. I'm just going to keep saying that. We'll just pretend it's nighttime, okay?
Just run with it.
All right, so back to the April time period here, we're going to revisit revenue projections. Revenue will change up until the very end, and revenue will change after the budget is approved. So it's a moving target, and you're doing the best you can to project expenditures, and you just hope and just make the best estimate on that revenue. And then when we get down to June, we'll do a second reading in May, and then in June, you'll have your public hearing and do the third reading of the budget. All right. So again, talking about the various funds. I think you probably watched the video that I created, hopefully, about general fund and just school district accounting in general and the different types of funds. You have capital funds, you have debt service funds, you have special revenue funds, you heard SURDEP fund. There's all kinds of funds. Again, we're only dealing with the general fund tonight. And so here is, when you're looking at the general fund budget, you have $325 million, right? That sounds like a very large number. So those are all your stacks of coins. Well, if you watch the video, those flashing 9 right there, 90% of that is tied up in salaries. So when we're really looking at what we need to focus on when we're talking about what are we going to modify here in the budget, you're looking just at that little 10%. But in that 10%, you've got fixed costs. We have to have electricity. We have to have water. We have to have property insurance. There are just things that you just can't cut that out of a budget. There's just nothing you can do about it. So of that, that's about $35 million is the amount, the 10% of the budget. You can go ahead and take $10 million and just put it to the side just between electricity and property insurance, that alone. But we know there's other fixed costs, right? So now we're down to just 70% of that money that we're really working with of what's working, what's not working, and what can we modify. All right, so the budget process, we're conducting our needs assessment. SLT is loving every Friday for 3.5 hours with me talking about our priorities. We have wonderful Post-its that we'll be putting up this Friday and really looking at, what is our core foundation? What are the things that we are going to keep that are just a must-have? We have to have them. And so we prioritize those, but we don't do it alone. We are meeting with DLT. We're really working the Budget Advisory Council, the board. So all that plays into that. And then based on those priorities, we project the expenditures. Then we project the revenue. Typically, a finance person wants to know what the revenue is first to know what we can buy, but unfortunately in governmental and school districts, that's not how that works. And then at the end, you just have to make adjustments. You can't spend more than the revenue you have coming in, or you have to use your fund balance, which is your savings. So moving on, every year we say, oh, it's going to be a tough budget, and everybody laughs because you say that every year. Well, this year, we really mean it. So let me explain why. It's the perfect storm this year. We have a lot of things we're dealing with. We all know we're going through the pandemic still, right? We're recovering from it. We're seeing staffing shortages. We're just dealing with all of those things, all the things that the children and the staff are dealing with. Then you throw inflation into that. I know we talked about eggs in SLT, about the price of eggs and how much eggs cost. Prices have gone up on everything. So when we look at that $35 million we have to work with, we have to realize those costs are going to go up just to keep them the same things we had. I can't control if there's an increase in the utility bill. It's just one of those things that we have to be prepared for. Then you have the ESSER funding cliff. It's not happening this year, but it's happening the next year, and we can't just look at 1 year. We've got to look forward and see what's going on, so we have to start preparing for that and transitioning for that cliff. Then we have a school we're opening, which is exciting and it's wonderful, but really we've got to remember that although that doesn't open till August of '24, we still need to kind of get some staff ready, and there's some startup things that would not be capital in nature that would be paid with the bond referendum. So we've got to include a little bit of that in the 2024 budget as well. All that is a lot to deal with, right? Here's another one for you, the new funding formula. That one alone is a huge thing. There were winners and there were losers with that formula. And that has had an impact, and we're now seeing that impact, and I'll share some information on that as we go through this. So again, it's the perfect storm, and it's going to be a tough budget season, but we're going to work together, we're going to collaborate, and we're going to make the best decision for the children. So what are our challenges? These are the expenditures that we just know we're going to have to pay for. These are just very basic, just a couple of them. There's always more to add to this, but just to do a salary step. So we have everybody on a scale, and we're just going to do a step of 2%. Just a 2% step takes them up to the next box. That's about $6 million to do that. That's not funded by the state. Some of it will be for teachers, but the district has to come up with that money to give increases. Inflation. Is there a question? Go ahead.
Just out of curiosity, so with that salary step, is that just a number that is increased every year? What I'm asking is, I understand the two-step increase,
Right.
but also when we're thinking big budget, every year we have really seasoned veteran teachers who retire who are making nice salaries, and we have significant number of new teachers who come in that are at that bottom step. So doesn't that balance itself out?
In a perfect world, it'd be great if it does that, but it doesn't, unfortunately. And then when you look at the vacancies we have some veteran teachers that are staying on, which we are grateful for because we need them because we have so many vacancies. So unfortunately, we're not in a situation where that's happening. And when we get new teachers, they're not always that first level teacher. And so when we budget, we do have to budget at a medium number. We don't budget at the highest number. We do budget our vacancies at a medium number to account for that. Some will come in higher, some will come in lower.
And we have had in the past, we've had years where we had no pay increase.
That's right.
Teachers got it, support staff did not, and the only reason the teachers got it is because it was legislated that way. But, so we, you could do that, but I'm gonna tell you right now, it is not a morale builder.
Oh, I wasn't saying
Yeah.
not to do it. I'm saying when we're thinking about the increase in the budget of 2%, $6 million, in my head, I was thinking as teachers retire and new ones come on, that 2% increase would just kind of
Yeah,
even out the
it would
budget.
drop, yeah.
Again, if we,
I understand what she's saying.
all right, so the inflation, 2%, we all know that number is way too low. It is way more than 2%. But just for fun, that's the number I put in here. That's your $35 million of your general fund budget, $700,000. And we know it needs to be more than that, but I just use that for this presentation. And then we have ES19. Again, we said we got to get things going at the end of the year. That's going to be, you're going to need a principal, you're going to need executive secretary, and then those things that are not capital in nature that you're not allowed to charge to a capital project fund. You're just not allowed to. It's against the rules. Those are tax exempt bonds, and you just cannot pay for certain things out of that. And so that has to come from the general fund to operate. And then again, we're not just dealing with fiscal year 24, and we're not just dealing with 25. We are projecting, much further than that, but we do have the ESSER funding cliff. That's $7 million of an annual reoccurring cost that we need to either decide if we have another funding source to cover that, or is there something that's not working, and then this would take the place of that something. So we really need to look at all those things, and we have to start preparing now for that. And then capital project cost, we know that we just voted on ES19, and we increased that budget $19 million. Well, ES18, we know we're going to need $19 million at least, if that is where we go forward with that. And then technology needs. I think Dr. Rivers showed us that it's about $20 million to refresh all our devices. We were able to come up with half of that with our 8% bond. Again, that's a separate fund, 8% bond, but we still have $10 million of need there. So we've got some big needs. So what is our revenue looking like? I mentioned the new revenue formula. Right now, I think we're cost neutral. I don't think we're going to get an increase there. I think it's just neutral. We're not going to get anything. We had a meeting last week with CFOs across the state, and we were able to calculate the formula and show that you can actually grow, have an increase in enrollment, and have a reduction in your revenue with the new formula. Because if you don't grow more than the weighted pupil unit across the entire state, then you don't get the increase. That money goes to another district that grew more. And so you have to keep in mind, we are really relying on that calculation to be correct because it impacts us. Every school across every district, it impacts us. So local taxes, this is just a growth projection. This is just, assessments and just a natural increase. We're projecting maybe $3 million of revenue, so that's good news, right? We got an increase. That's not increasing taxes. That's just what we think with the growth is going to happen. And then Tier 3 tax revenue. I throw Tier 3 out there like everybody would know what I'm talking about, but you might know, some of you, Act 388. This is where they took the tax away from the property owner. You're not taxing the primary resident property owner, and the state said, don't worry, you're not going to get that money, but we'll reimburse you for that. And so it sounds like a great deal, but it's not a one-for-one reimbursement. So not going to focus on that, though. We're going to focus on there is going to be growth in that money, and it looks like about $3.3 million. So,
That's because of any sales tax they levied across the state. I think that's the state's source of revenue for that.
right. The problem is it got left on 2007 values and just hasn't changed. So again, not here to debate that, just here to talk about what growth I think we will see in that revenue source. So we're going to take a little bit of time. I don't know if somebody can set a timer on SLT for me, about 5 minutes, and just talk at the table and, what surprised you with what you just heard? Do you have any questions? I'm going to try to walk around. I'm going to turn my mic off and try to have just some conversation and dialogue. And then if you have questions that you want to put on a Post-it, we've got a board up here. We can put those questions on there. SLT would love to spend a Friday answering those questions and looking through that. So we'll take about 5 minutes right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, yes. Yes.
We're going to kind of pull back together here. I would also, at this time, I would open it up to the board. If there's something you want to ask or bring up that was discussed at your table. I know we talked about some needs over here, technology, talking about that. I didn't get a chance to come over to this table. Dr. Postlewaite, was there anything over at this table that kind of was brought up that I may not be getting ready to say in the presentation? We might be covering it.
I think a couple of key questions were the ESSER flip.
Yes,
How
ma'am.
we ended up putting money in some recurring costs and why we added positions. And they were concerned about the changes in state funding, making it so impossible for us to predict what revenue we may or will likely not get. Was there anything else?
I guess the only other thing was the funding formula. I mean, how often does the funding formula change?
And I'm going to go over that. I've got a
Okay.
part on that, so we'll touch base on that with the funding formula. Dr. Powers, was there anything else? I know we talked about the technology. Nope, we're good?
Yeah, we were just talking about a more sustainable model for technology costs
Right. Because we know that's a reoccurring need.
based upon use and where's the maximum.
All right. So going back, talking about the state funding formula and the change. This slide right here, I am using fiscal year 22, 135-day count. So this was prior to my arrival here last year when you were working on the budget. These are the numbers you were being presented with from the state, from legislation. And so just looking at this number, looking at it and seeing that the column there on the left, the lighter blue, that's what you used to get, right? Almost $37 million. So the new funding formula said, okay, we're going to have one pot of money and we're going to redistribute, we're just going to distribute this money out, but we're going to do it on a new formula. So the old formula used to say, okay, per kid, you're going to get $2,516. So it was really easy to project. We think we're going to get 500 more kids, 500 times that number. A little more complicated that because you might have some weighted at a higher weight. And so, of course, we had a spreadsheet for that, and we would project it. So it was pretty simple, right? You just throw the number in there, you're getting more money for the kids. Wonderful. New formula is not that way. We are relying on every district's weighted pupil unit number to get the whole state weighted pupil number to get our percent of what we're going to get of the money. So until I know what every other district has with their weightings, I cannot accurately project revenue. I can come up with some figures based on the 45th day right now, but we all know those numbers change. They're going to change again at the 135th day. And I also, you just have to think about it. What if there's a mistake in somebody's calculation? What if one district has coded children improperly, in error, not on purpose, just it happens, and they're coded as a special allocation that's at the higher weight of 2.6. Well, now their weighted pupil unit number is really high, and it makes ours smaller, and we get less money, and they get more money. And so we really have to think about this formula, and we looked at it last week and seeing the impact of it. But right here, you used to get 137 million. The new formula said 132 million. So this, again, was preliminary numbers when they were working through the legislation. And so there's a $4.5 million difference, right? So to put that number, I mean, it looks very small on the graph because we're dealing with big numbers. 4.5 million is 61 teachers. 61 teachers. And when you look at that, fortunately, the state did not cut the budget down to the 132 million. They knew there were problems with this funding formula. There were probably about 5 districts that had a problem. We were lucky enough to be in that category. And so they said, we're going to hold you harmless, and we'll just give you the amount you used to get. The problem is when you got that number right there, what you didn't see is that 137 million right there. That wasn't just your general fund money. There's 2 other funds that got rolled up in this new formula. $3 million that were in other funds got rolled up into this 132 right here. The problem with those other funds, they're all separate, right? They're all separate funds. They already had things budgeted in those funds. And they took that revenue and said, we're not going to give you this revenue anymore. We're going to put it over here in the general fund bucket. What do we do with these teachers? What do we do with all the people that were being paid out of that and the supplies? It had to go into the general fund, right? So Yes, it looked like 4.5, but it was really 7.5. And you just don't see that. And that's the one thing I want the board to realize when you're talking to legislators and you're seeing numbers and you're going to hear there's more revenue than ever. Yes, there is more money this year. There absolutely is. But there's also a different formula and the way it's calculated, and you can grow but still lose money. And so you have to remember, you can't believe everything you hear, and you have to really look at the details and really look deeper than what you're just hearing. So putting this on a family perspective, we're dealing with millions of dollars, but we're going to just put it very simple. You have a family budget, holiday budget, $300. We have a mom, a dad, and 2 children. So we're going to give the kids each $100, and then mom and dad are going to share $100, so they each get $50, right? So then the next year happens. What changed? They added a child, that's right, but their budget didn't change, right? It's still $300, but you added another student, you added another child. So how do you cover it? Mom and dad, no more for you. That's right, because you didn't want to take it away from the other 2 kids, right? You want to keep them whole. And so you had to make a sacrifice, and that was a sacrifice. That's the budget season we're looking at. We got to look at where can we reallocate funds. So again, we're going to turn it back over to the tables to talk about this. Again, if you have suggestions or questions, write them on the Post-it, or we can bring it back to the group. I'm going to sit at this table this time and switch up. Matt, you want to switch with me, or that way we've, oh, Libby's switching? Okay. All right. Mary, you got the timer? Thank you. come back together as a group. Was there anything at this table that we wanted to share with the entire group? Just a summary or some things that were brought up? Or you can put it on a Post-it. All right, on this side, did you? Okay.
We talked about, okay, there's obviously a gap between the revenue and the expenses that we're expecting, and so how would we fill that gap? Would it be a term I use, rob Peter to pay Paul? What programs can we steal from to fund that, or millage? I mean, raising millage, which apparently hasn't been done in a number of years, so just even thinking ahead of how we would do that.
Okay, had similar conversations at this side about that. Is there anything else that this side would like to say?
I have a question. When you project how many students we're going to grow, what is that based on? Because I know there's like the ALA school, we're going to lose some students from that. A lot of students are going to private schools now. Does it even out or?
So what we did this year, unfortunately, we had some COVID years. Historically, you would take a 3-year trend, a 5-year trend, and just kind of see, work with, like Mr. Warren has a relationship with the county, and we know where the developments are going, and we look at pockets of where we might have more growth. You'd use that standard average number, and then you might adjust based on some of that other information that you receive. Unfortunately, we had the COVID years in there. If I do a 3-year average, that number's too low. We know that. So what we're doing right now is just taking the 45th day. Again, I'll look at the 135th day, and we're projecting a 1% increase. That's a very modest increase. Some schools will grow more than that. Some will be less than that. And we're just going to have to, again, it's a continual thing. It's not just we did this, and this is the way staffing's going to be. I'm sure if you talk to Mrs. Price over here, she would tell you she spends all day moving FTEs around to make everything work. So it's not just a simple calculation, and unfortunately, the COVID numbers really distort the projection. I mean, it has varied. I think we budgeted last year, it was close to 2%, I think is what the growth was, and we didn't come in where we thought we were. We projected 600 students, and I think we had about 400 students growth. We don't know what the impact's going to be with any charter schools or private schools. I mean, those are really hard things to project.
I guess one other thing, I've heard some of the discussion about, hey, there's a possibility you might have to raise millage or whatever, but I just think about in my profession at our company, a lot of times the discussion is thrown around that, hey, let's just raise our prices on our customers. But a lot of times it alienates our customers and actually hurts us in the long run. So I guess what I'm wondering is, you mentioned about how we have that $3 million that got moved over with the new funding formula. Is there a way, I say simply, but is there a way for us to be able to look and say, how much do I have in my 401k? How much do I have in my savings? How much do I have in my checking? How much do I have in property? How much do I have stuck in the drawer? And see what's the total amount of net worth that I really have as a district versus what my liabilities are. I mean, it may not be that simple, but I'm trying to think in simple terms to, the people that are out there looking at that.
Absolutely, you can do an analysis and look what you're standing at. The problem that you run into with governmental and school districts is, again, you have specific funds. You have the general fund that is to operate a school district. While we have great net worth in our school buildings, if they were bought with bond referendum money and built with bond referendum, there's regulations that you have to abide by. I can't just sell them. I can't there's certain things you have to follow. Then you have a special revenue fund over here that you have, money coming in, and you just think, well, just take the money over there. You can't. There's a grant agreement tied to this that Dr. Postlethwaite and I have signed that said we will only spend this on these items. It is not to operate the school district, so you are legally bound that you cannot use those funds. You have your debt service fund. Again, those funds are for the capital project fund. They can't be taken and used for your general fund. It's just separate, and you can't. So even if I came up with this is the net worth, There are things you just can't use. We are dealing with the general fund. Those are the things we can work with. We look at that fund balance. We have 75 million in the unassigned fund balance. Sounds like a great big number, right? Like, well, you got 75 million there, your problem's solved. Well, we're required by law to keep a certain amount in there. It's a very small amount we're required, 1% or 1 month of operating expenditure. Anybody knows you, so that would mean if we had no revenue come in after 1 month, we'd have to close. You can't have just 1 month. You need to have 2 months in there. So that's what the board is looking at, that policy right now, 16.67%. You got to keep 50 million in there, right? You got to have that in there. Can't touch it. And that number grows. It doesn't just stay at that. As your budget grows, that number has to grow. So yes, it's increasing. Everybody sees it increasing, but it has to because our budget's growing.
I mean, I was just curious because if you do affect your business owners and secondary property owners and everything, I can almost see a backlash to the board as to, did you look at this? Did you look at that? And it'd be helpful if we could be armed with that information to speak intelligently to that. And I don't know if we necessarily have that. Maybe I can just speak for me because I'm the new guy on the block, but I'd like to have some concrete resolution on what that is before we start making a move like that.
Absolutely.
Chris, I agree, and let me just piggyback back. I know we have some land and we have a property that we could potentially sell. Is that something that could go into the general fund?
Again, if it's bought with bond referendum money originally, it has to stay in the
not.
source
It
of where it
wasn't, I
was
don't
bought.
We've had it for a long time, and it's not being used.
Could have been capital project money. If it's the capital project money, each year we issue a bond. That is how we were able to pay for the technology improvements, and we also do facility improvements. Again, if they are done with those sources, if items are done with that, you're just really stuck with how you can use those proceeds. The government did tax-exempt bonds for us. They don't want us to just be able to do wonderful other things with that. It's meant for capital projects. Could we take that money and put it into a new building? Yes, we probably have some way that we can do that, but you have to really make sure you're following the bond requirements, whether it was referendum or 8% bond.
And just so I have it clear in my head, the $3 million that you referenced, that was actual state funding that was
Yes.
apportioned on a yearly basis to our operating fund, that when the funding model was changed, they moved those funding lanes to general fund. So again, it wasn't a capital or property, it
No.
was an annual state funding, correct?
That's correct. It was
Thank you.
EIA funding that was in a 300 fund, and there was two different ones. One was a $2 million amount, then a smaller one that they called aid to districts, and then that all got pushed over into that one pot of money. All right, any other questions? All right, so we talked about the revenue. We all said there was going to be a gap, right? I think this table made it very clear that my inflation rate is not high enough. We're definitely going to see more than 2% on that 35 million. I just was trying to make the number look as little as possible for the variance, but we all know it's much bigger than this. So your expenses, typically the taller column you would want to be your revenue. Unfortunately, that's our expenses, $7 million. Again, that was just a step, right? That was just a step. That was just the really small inflation amount, and that was to start staffing the other school and getting it ready to operate because you can't use capital referendum money to start some of those things. And then our revenue, local tax dollars we think are going to go up, and then your tier money. So we've got a gap of $700,000. We know there's more than that gap, right? We all know that. Here's some things that we didn't put in here. Health insurance last year increased $3.3 million. Retirement increase, we know it's going to go up 1%. I just didn't want to put the number in there because I don't know how much they'll fund it. They might fund some of it. They could fund all of it. We just don't know those numbers. But $2.3 million just to do the 1% retirement increase that we know is going to happen. And then when you're listening and you're hearing the governor's budget and his proposal, increase of a salary of $2,500 for all teachers, right? Increase everybody, $2,500. You have to remember when they say that, when they're going to fund that, they are funding the amount from the state scale. So the state scale right now is $40,000 for a starting teacher. They want to increase that to $42,500. So they will pay $2,500 for that increase. Unfortunately, what they would pay us right here on this bottom row, they're only going to pay us that amount to get us to that number because we already pay that much. So there's $1,400 difference between that $2,500 and that number. $14,010, that's the difference. If we have to do that, we have to pay for that from the general fund. They're only going to give us this amount because they're only going to fund up to that amount. So to be competitive with other districts, what do? But you have to come up with that money because it's not funded. And they will tell you, we fully funded a $2,500 increase. Yes, off of the state scale, not the district scale.
And that retirement increase is going to be higher. The South Carolina
Oh, yeah.
retirement system lost a lot of money
Yeah.
last year in the market. So anyhow, it's going to be higher.
And they have changed how they calculate how much you get of those increases. Between the health insurance and the retirement, one is calculated one way, and the other is on the weighted pupil unit calculation again, which we've already said doesn't really work. We're seeing the impact of that. All right. Turning it back over, we're going to just kind of break out again, have some conversations, talk about how does this impact us, what are some suggestions, how can we move forward, start thinking about priorities, and we'll do about 5 minutes on this, and then we'll come back together as a group. we're going to come back together. We had great conversation over here. I'll turn it over here. Did you have anything you wanted to share with the group? Anything that came up that would be good for the other side to hear?
I mentioned that we should all think about reaching out to our legislators and talking about, an impact fee to new builds in the area, builders that, come in and bring all this new growth, but then they don't pay anything towards our school. So, something like that might be worth having a conversation with our legislators over. That
So-
could bring in some more money for us.
So county council, you want to talk to your
Yeah,
council members?
for sure.
Not the delegation, but council.
Anything
Yeah,
else?
and I just thought about one other thing, like what we've done at our company is we've been able to work with our health insurance provider. We have a program called Know Your Numbers, where if we have people that get a certain amount of screening or whatever, preventative screening, and they meet with a healthcare professional to review what those numbers are and some preventative measures, they've been able to leverage, 3% or 4% discount in what those health insurance premiums are. So, I think what we're talking about is we need to evaluate where we are with all our programs, but even outside of our educational programs, would something like that be available with our health insurance provider that might free up another 600, 700,000? I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I just think we're challenged so much so until we need to kind of get out the box, kick the box down the street, come back up the street, get away from the box, and then think, so.
Right. And I think what the challenge we face, being a government, right, we are in the state health system. So we have to abide by the rules with the state health insurance plan. You certainly can look at property insurance and things like that. You could look at that and make some moves there, but the dollars you would save, are they really, but it certainly is something to look at in a way that we could look at when we're assessing what works, what doesn't work, if there's something we need to make changes with. All right, this side of the room?
I think one thing we talked about,
Excuse me, to the microphone. One thing we talked about, similar to what I think Chris and Katie were getting at, is to really do some digging in the general fund to see where potential opportunities were, like you just alluded to, where there could be some additional funds to be found that could be allocated to cover some of this gap. We want to see some of that, some of the examples of things that you've looked at, so we can understand some of the things you're digging in to try to find some of those dollars. But then also, I know you're kind of locked into the general fund, but thinking outside of the what I'll call general fund box, to see, give us some examples of some things you've looked at outside of the general fund box that might be opportunities. Either A, you're going to be surprised and find something fantastic and we're all going to celebrate together, or B, we're going to understand that there was true due diligence done. The last thing that we want to do is to raise millage. That doesn't feel good for anybody. So we want to make sure and have an understanding of what all research and analysis and whatnot has gone into this.
And I think we can absolutely share that. We are working, like I said, every Friday, we're looking at things. We have Post-it notes, we have spreadsheets. I'm meeting one-on-one with each of the division leaders. I think we have 3 meetings tomorrow I have where we are going through not only, you have to remember, we're still working on the prior year right now, the current year. We're looking at the current year budget. Where are you at? Where are you coming in? Where are you short? And then we're also planning, okay, you're getting ready to do your budget for next year. Again, what programs are working, what's not working? Is there anything that we can move around? We are certainly doing that work. Again, it's behind the scenes. That's what we're doing. That's the below-the-line work, as Dr. Postlethwaite likes to talk about. And we are doing that. So we have no problem sharing that, that work is being done.
Well, I would just say, we keep talking about our legislators, and I think that it's very important that they see and hear from us. I've said this before, that last year during the funding formula conversation with the Senate Finance K-12 subcommittee, I attended the meeting and I did not speak, but I was there, and Senator Setzler is on that committee, and when one of his colleagues or a speaker would say something that really didn't marry up to what was, I would just text him information. And I think that, sometimes we wait till the 11th hour to show up or send an email or make a phone call. And I think by then it's too late, that we need to be a part of the process as they are building these sometimes cockamamie ideas. But, just be there and also go to them, when we're talking to them directly. And instead of, complaining about it, but saying, what can we do to, because, I do think, especially our delegation, they don't want to do anything that harms our district. I don't think they do. But, so what would you recommend that we do to make this better for Lexington One and your constituents? Because we share the same voters. What can we do to convince your other colleagues, or what can you do to help them understand that this funding formula is not good for the students in Lexington One? And so I think maybe we approach it with a collaborative spirit, that we're not just going up to them with our hands out and complaining that we're not getting enough money, but, we really do want this to be improved so that, because they're not, they have this huge surplus that they're using, and hopefully they're using it well, but then they're pointing at us and saying, well, they can just raise millage. They've got the funds to do it. And so that, I don't think they're setting us up to be the bad guys, but, kind of help them understand that we're in this together. I think that might be beneficial.
All right, anything else on this side? All right, and I do think it's all about collaboration. It is working with everybody. I think that is what I was going to wrap up with is that's what we need to do. We need to work on who we're going to talk to, what we're going to talk about. The one thing, again, remember, the numbers that we talk about are always changing. And so you will share a number with the legislator and they'll say, no, that's not the number. Again, there's so many numbers floating around. Just know it's constantly changing you. But that team right back there, my finance team, we are on top of it. We are looking at those numbers. We were all at the meeting together last week, working with other leaders, again, collaborating with the CFOs across the state, particularly ones that are growing like we are, that are in the same situation. So it is about collaboration, and I would just wrap it up with that I just really appreciate the help of my team back there, my finance team. They are the ones doing a lot of this work in the background, my SLT members. Love that you spend Fridays with me, and just Dr. Postlewaite's leadership and the board's involvement and collaboration, and we'll get through this. It will be a challenge, but we will get through it, and we'll make good decisions. All right.
Dr. Hustwaite, anything else on this?
No, we just want to thank the board for your time this morning. If you have any suggestions for us about how to improve the slides or the basic presentation, because we need a wide swath of our community to understand the situation that we're in. We're not in a position to add programs this year. We are in a position to hold steady and to identify those programs and services that are impacting our students in a very positive way, and to pare down by reducing those that aren't, so that we can move forward with clear priorities without raising millage. There are so many unknowns right now that we hear the board loudly and clearly about making sure that what we're doing is elegant, is effective, is efficient, and that we can support it with the resources that are coming in. So that's what I think we've heard today. As you've seen the slides and you've thought about it, if you have any suggestions that could help us make our situation clearer to our constituents, we're open for the feedback. You were the guinea pigs today, so please let us know, because we have this problem in education. Every year when we start the budget, we cry wolf, wolf. And so we're crying tiger, tiger, wolf, leopard, lions. Yes. So this is one of the toughest situations I've seen the district in. And so we don't want to raise millage, but we need to figure out how to guide our system through this and protect everyone who needs to get safely through this narrow passage. We definitely want to take care of our personnel pay them fairly, to create good working conditions, because we're competing with everyone else. So we don't want to shortchange there, but we absolutely have to find some ways to move through this, and it will not be painless. So thank you for your time today. We'll stick around to answer any questions you may have.
All right, board. Moving on to item 8.0, and thank you, Ms. Miller, for the excellent and very clear presentation. When you can, before lunchtime, make school finance make sense, you're doing a good job. Board, you have received the following reports: the monthly general fund financial report, and you're receiving these now. As you recall, our January board meeting was early, and these reports were not ready yet, so you are receiving them today. The monthly general fund financial report, the monthly general fund budget transfers report, the monthly capital projects reports, and the monthly unauthorized procurements report for December. Ms. Miller, is there anything you'd like to add or comment about any of those reports?
Yes, the only thing I wanted to add was on your unauthorized, you see that number. I want you to know that about 52% of that is just because they didn't use the new forms we created. So while it seems like a big number, it's really just a form issue, and so we're working with the schools to coach them and guide them and get the new forms. So don't panic about that number. It's just that, we put out those new forms. That's what that relates to, a big chunk of that.
Some implementation growing pains.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. All right, before we adjourn, I'd like to remind you that we will have another board workshop next Tuesday, January 31st, for an overview of the 2018 bond referendum and capital programs. That will be in the evening. We also invite members of the community to attend one of the 5 community meetings that the district is hosting to garner stakeholder feedback in the strategic planning process. Those meetings are going to be held at 6:30 p.m. All around the district on February 2nd at Gilbert Middle School, on February 7th at Peoria Middle School, on February 9th at the Lexington Technology Center, February 21st at Meadow Glen Middle, and February 23rd at White Knoll High School. And you don't necessarily have to attend the meeting that is in your geographic area if one of the others is more convenient. And you don't need to attend all of them, just one. On February 16th through 19th, several of our board members are going to be attending the 2023 South Carolina School Boards Association Annual Convention in Hilton Head. And that will be before our February board meeting, which is on the 28th. And that's on the 4th Tuesday because the first Tuesday is right after a long holiday weekend. And so we wanted to make sure that our staff has time to get their legs back under them after the long weekend. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Rice. Is there any discussion? All right. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone. This is very excellent.